there's a card in a position where it's normally bad but really good in a specific situation, I think that's a positive thing because it encourages creativity and gives the user a high sense of fulfillment when using that card successfully. Regarding the unique circumstances, Supercell left this card alone, not giving it any form of attention for the entirety of 2020. Most people didn't think it needed a buff, and it was popular among casual players now. There were so many different Giant Skeleton clone decks that weren't that good competitively but just so fun to play casually. Although it was seemingly in a perfect position, players still took a lot of issue with the card's Death Bomb. It was just such a frustrating wall to deal with and led to so many stalemates. Despite no direct changes, the Giant Skeleton's popularity would slowly increase over the span of 2020. He had below average rates at the beginning of 2020, but by December was in 7% of Grand Challenge decks with a 52% win rate, which are healthy stats. These are very average rates and showed the card was not really an underdog off-meta card anymore. One surprising combo that popped up towards the end of the year was Royal Giant with the Giant Skeleton. The Giant Skeleton would clear the path to allow the Royal Giant to lock onto the tower. This was the most popular variant you would see, and it was extremely good, pushing to number 1 in the world in the December 2020 season. This honestly was the first Giant Skeleton deck I would consider to be a mainstream meta deck. This deck thrives going into 2021, and so many people were using it. Although in recent years Giant Skeleton was looked upon generally favorably, it was now looked upon in a much more negative light despite its statistically balanced rates due to its prominence in this frustrating to play against deck. So when March came along, Supercell would rework the Giant Skeleton in an attempt to keep its power level the same, but remove its most frustrating aspect. The damage of its Death Bomb would be reduced by 53%, but the damage the actual troop dealt would be increased by 28%. This damage buff allowed it to 3-shot fireballees like Musketeer, 2-shot fireballable cards like Magic Archer, and 1-shot loggable cards like the Princess. If left alone, it would do about the same damage to the Princess Tower as it did before. Supercell's reasoning basically explained that the Death Bomb made the Giant Skeleton not really require any skill to play. The Giant Skeleton was no longer a card that took a lot of skill to get value out of. Previously, really only top pros could make it work competitively, but now almost everyone who played the card for even a little while could easily succeed. Supercell and most players do not like defensive metas, so obviously they were trying to make it more offensive. However, with the death damage being less than half of what it used to be, it was practically useless. It couldn't even take out something as fragile as a flying machine. It was no longer threatening. The death damage was pretty much the only thing the card had going for it. Without it, it was basically just a worse P.E.K.K.A, and the stats definitely reflected this. This card drops to having the 3rd lowest use rate and 4th lowest win rate in Grand Challenges. It wasn't just underpowered, it was completely useless. When I say the Giant Skeleton was nothing without his death damage, I wasn't over-exaggerating. It was arguably in the worst state it's ever been in, and Giant Skeleton players who invested years into playing him were understandably very upset. Sure, Supercell took care of the Giant Skeleton's most frustrating aspect, but without that frustrating aspect, how is he supposed to find a proper place in the meta? In the next set of balance changes, the Giant Skeleton would get some more attention. By now, it was the 2nd least popular card in Grand Challenges, so it was in depth.